Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
That's how long it took.
Come down and say hi. Again. Only this time, let's wait till Doug gets here. Waiting for Doug. Thank you, Tiffany. I am feeling a little bit better. Pain medication has a way of making you feel really good. So I don't know if you guys, how many of you guys saw the false start. I lost track of time being in Central time zone and call it medicated. I'm gonna chalk it up to that. But I was, I thought, I don't know why I thought we did it from 2 to 3, but anyway, here we are again, waiting on Doug. We're a little bit, actually not early. We're waiting on. So I'll kind of give you guys a little rundown on what happened. There's Doug. He's admit. Doug, are you there, Douglas? Douglas, are you there? Hello, Doug. Testing, testing. Oh, he doesn't have his ears in. Now he's got his ears in.
I tried getting in 10 minutes ago and for the first link you sent, and it
didn't work, dude.
it did this forever.
Yeah, well, that's because I was premature. I was an hour early, so I lost track of time.
Don't let word get out about that. That you were premature.
So I'm telling everybody that kind of like my medical situation. I have a 7mm kidney stone that is stuck, and I have to.
Oh, that's yeah. You said you were Mississippi. I was trying to remember why. Now that's right. You were going to go out there for the procedure. Otherwise, you had to wait till what, November?
Well, the VA wasn't going to do it until November. And I'm with what's coming, with what I believe is coming, there was no way that I was going to wait that long. It's just not going to allow that to happen. So I have a very good friend, my friend Amy, who lives in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Her one of her really close friends is her husband is a urologist out here. So she put me in contact with him, and the appointment is tomorrow. So hold on one second. Scott's calling me. Hold on one second. Hey, brother, we're doing the Constitution class. Did you have something for me?
I need a verification code to get into this channel.
Okay. Did you send? Let me check and see if I got it. It is 469720. All right, buddy. Cool. We'll chat a little later. Goodbye. So anyway, So yeah, so they're gonna do my procedure tomorrow in Mississippi, but until that time, I have to stay medicated because if I didn't, the pain would be really, really brutal. So, and Amy, come say hi. This is my good friend Amy.
Hi, friends.
So she
Hi,
is
Douglas.
she's
Hi,
awesome.
good friend Amy.
My good friend Amy out in Mississippi. So she's a lifesaver. So anyway, you're eating again.
Lunch is
That's what
done.
you do. That's what you do best is eat.
Hey, man,
Remember?
in the morning, I don't get a chance to eat before I go to the class in Fallbrook. So I eat on the way back or whatever. And I usually have just less than an hour between me getting home and doing this. And then the moment this is over, I take off to San Juan Capistrano. So it's my only chance to eat.
Nice. Well, I understand that. I have this last couple of weeks. I've lost a lot of weight. You guys can probably tell. I'm slimming down.
Whether you like it or not, huh?
Right, whether I like it or not. Well, I like it. Actually, I like it. You know, I was in the best shape of my life about a year and a half, probably April of 2019, and I had bone to bone degeneration of my cartilage on my right knee, and I had bone to bone. It was really bad. I couldn't do anything. I got out of my workout habits, and then COVID. Then at the time that I was ready to get back into the gym, COVID struck, and got the what they call the pandemic pounds. So got a lot of them, but I'm back in. I was back in the gym before this happened, but and I'll be back shortly. This my recovery period on this is probably going to be about a week, and then I'll be able to get back in the gym again. So I'm eager to get back and do that. So anyway,
I'm actually in pretty good shape right now because round is a shape, right?
And the round is a shape indeed. But enough about me and on all my medical issues and weight issues and all this
we
other
got stuff to talk about. What's wrong with
Let's
you?
talk about the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. I wanted to bring up something real quick though while we are here. Matter of fact, let me get some notes here that I made. I was talking to my Fallbrook class this morning, and I've added some material for the judicial branch, and I wanted to just go over a couple things real quick, just for kicks and giggles.
Okay.
You hear me talk about all the time.
Hold on 1 second. Scott's calling me again. Do you have another one? You have another one, brother? 469-270. Negative. I'm on Mr. Constitution class. Okay, bye. Sorry, guys.
Scott McKay interrupting his own show.
Yeah, well, he's trying to live stream on 17 and it's not working. So anyway.
So 2 shows simultaneously. That's why you're here and he's not. One of the reasons, aside from the fact that we actually make a pretty good team, and I'm glad that it works out the way it does.
I agree. I think you and I do really well together. So
all right. So anyway, what I want to talk about real quick before we get started is you hear me all the time talk about how government is a necessary evil, but it's necessary because without law, there is no freedom. If there was no law enforcement and law, you'd be sitting on your front porch with your rifle in your lap all day to protect your possessions. You wouldn't have the freedom to go to work, things like that. So government, law, all of that is necessary, but government is not supposed to go beyond a certain line. What is necessary law versus unnecessary law? And it's funny because in 1 Timothy, it actually tells you a little bit about that. I'm talking book of the Bible. For those of you not Christians, bear with me because this is good for you too. In 1 Timothy, it says that the law is made for the lawbreakers, not for the righteous. See, and we're all not totally righteous. Obviously, all of us are flawed human beings. That's human nature. But for the most part, citizens tend to be people who follow the rules, follow whatever makes an orderly society. Sometimes we stray a little bit. We might go a little fast in our car or whatever, but for the most part, we are law-abiding citizens. The laws don't exist because of us. We're law-abiding. The laws exist for the lawbreakers, and the judicial branch exists to hear those cases regarding those persons or breaking the law, and to issue punishment for the breaking of that law. And I just wanted to get that out and a couple of other small things, because I think it's important for us to understand this, that when it comes to the rule of law, you hear me talk about that all the time, God's law, whatever, and it really comes down to jurisdiction, God's jurisdiction versus man's jurisdiction. You know, a law regarding a stop sign, for example, well, that's man's jurisdiction. God doesn't have anything to do with stop signs. However, something like abortion, maybe marriage, things like that, that's within God's jurisdiction. Excuse me. And our laws are not supposed to go against what God's jurisdiction is on that. So you have rule of law, you have man's law, rule of man, and I just wanted to give you that to kind of chew on. And there's more to it, but I'm not going to get into all the details. But I wanted to give that to you to chew on. And the reason why is because as we go through what we're going through today, it has to do with breaking the law. It has to do with rebellion, things like that, or at least that's a part of what we're going to talk about. So we're in the 14th Amendment, Section 2. Now, this article, 14th Amendment, Section 2, what it does is it changes how the enumeration for the Congress is. Because remember, prior to the war between the states, the
You
free
mean the war
population,
against, you mean the war preventing Southern independence?
the war of northern aggression.
It's having a little fun with you, brother. You have to roll with me today because I am feeling really good right now.
But you are in Mississippi right now too, so you know.
I am.
Uh,
I don't mean to derail you, bro. I'm just trying to inject a little humor.
I just tried to inhale last little piece of food that was in my mouth, and so excuse me if I start coughing in your ear. I'm trying to breathe again here. But anyway, so you've got prior to the war between the states, the basic idea when it came to the enumeration for Congress was it was the free population plus 3/5 of all of the persons, slaves. Wasn't a whole number because in the southern states who had too much power in the House, it wasn't 0 for the slaves because then the North would have too much power. So there was a compromise, 3/5. Now these people are citizens. So 3/5 rule is gone. Now they're going to be listed as a citizen. And so the enumeration is going to alter slightly. So here's what we're going to, so here's what it says. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. So the whole person state, excluding Indians not taxed. Why not count towards the enumeration for the House Indians not taxed? Because they're not citizens. Indians taxed have become citizens. They fall under American jurisdiction. Indians not taxed, they belong to a different country. They're a tribe, a different sovereignty. So Indians not taxed are not counted. Now, at the time, they didn't have an illegal immigration problem. But if they're not willing to count Indians not taxed because they're not citizens, should they be counting for the purpose of enumeration in Congress, in the House, illegal aliens who are not citizens? So while the Constitution doesn't specifically say yes or no regarding illegal aliens, because it wasn't an issue at the time, it does say that they were not counted Indians not taxed, and Indians not taxed were not counted because they were not citizens. Therefore, based on that, the belief is by most constitutionalists, that means that only citizens should be counted towards the enumeration the apportionment for the House of Representatives. I believe that we should propose an amendment and have it added to the Constitution for clarity to explain such, but until then, this is what we have to go by. So, it really depends on your quote unquote interpretation of that. Are illegal aliens the same as an Indian not taxed? And I would say yes. So they really shouldn't be counted towards the apportionment for the House of Representatives. So now we go back to the census. On the census, there was a question whether or not asking if someone was a citizen should be on the census. And the court struck it down saying that was unconstitutional. No, I think it's very constitutional. I think the question should be there. We need to know who to count for the purpose of the House of Representatives. And if you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be counted towards that. All right, let's continue.
Okay.
But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for president and vice president, remember those are separate ballots, president and vice president, of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof is denied to any of the male inhabitants. Remember back then females weren't voting yet. Not because the Constitution disallowed women from voting, but because the states had laws in place that for the most part didn't allow women to vote. Some did, some were property owners, but for the most part it was men. And they doubled down on that men thing here in this. Being 21 years of age, that was the voting age at the time, and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged, except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representative therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. In other words, if persons that should be allowed to vote, that are now citizens, emancipated slaves, are denied that ability to vote, that number of people that are denied to vote will be removed from the calculation for how many members of the House will be allowed. In other words, your number of members of the House is based on population. But if you're denying people the opportunity to vote, then the calculation for how many representatives you get will be reduced based on that loss in the population of those that were denied. They won't be counted as part of the population for the purpose of figuring out how many representatives you have. In other words, if you're denying people the opportunity to vote because of form or condition of servitude or skin color, you will probably lose representatives in Congress. That's ultimately what it's saying.
Okay.
Yeah, because remember, the idea here is we don't want this ever to happen again. We've had these states, and remember also, this is from the point of view of a Republican Party that believed in that it was a firm union and that it was illegal to secede. So they want to punish the states that seceded. So this is a part of the punishment, and also to make sure it doesn't happen again. We're going to hold the union together no matter what. So, and so part of the punishment is you're going to treat these people who used to enslave properly. Because if you don't, you're not only being punished because of your secession, we're going to punish you for not treating these people properly also. If they don't get to vote, you lose that part of the population in the calculation for how many representatives you get, which means you'll be overwhelmed by the North in the House because of you not allowing certain people to vote that should be able to. Now, the next one is very important because it ties into what's going on today. Now, while it is addressed to those who participated in the Confederacy after having taken an oath to the Constitution prior to the war as office holders, they didn't want insurrection or rebellion like this to happen ever again. So they also wrote it in such a way that it applies across the board even today. When I finish reading this, I'll explain what I mean by that. So 14th Amendment, Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector, president or vice president, or hold any office civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So in other words, if you participated in the rebellion, you participated in the Confederacy, but you took an oath to the Constitution, now you are denying the Constitution. You turned your back on it, and you turned your back on the Union by being a part of this Confederacy. So you're a bad boy, you misbehaved, you're a rebellious insurrectionist. You can never hold office again unless Congress votes by 2/3 to allow it. Now, if that's the case, and these states are coming back into the Union now, and the people who are holding office can't hold office anymore because, well, they participated in the rebellion, who's going to hold office in these states? It's going to be newbies. It's going to be people that are there from the North, the carpetbaggers and the military and all that. And it's going to be newly emancipated slaves, blacks. The first Republicans in Congress were black in these states because the politicians couldn't hold office anymore because they had sworn an allegiance, sworn to uphold the Constitution. But then they participated in this rebellion of this insurrection. So they lost their seat and they lost their ability to regain it. Now, let's bring that to modern times. Was BLM, Portland, Seattle, Antifa, all that jazz, was that rebellion and insurrection? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So now, any of these politicians that are giving aid and comfort to those groups, they have just violated this clause. They should be removed from office immediately and never be allowed to hold office again based on this clause. Here's the problem. How do you do it? How do you get them out of office? A friend of mine says the way to do it is through a common law grand jury. In other words, a people's grand jury, where would you issue indictments and then the sheriff would or the marshal would carry it out. But according to this clause,
how would you make that stick, though?
What do you mean?
How would you make that stick? You know, if you have a court, you know, the court's power is really ultimately enforced by somebody, somebody with a gun. It's law enforcement. Law enforcement is supposed to enforce a court's order. If the people get together and say and hold a people's grand jury, and then they indict somebody under this people's grand jury, what
it's still gonna have to go through the courts for conviction.
I understand that, but my point is that how are you going to make it stick? How are you going to enforce that?
That's a good question, because in today's day and age, I really don't know. Because we are faced against an enemy that's not listening, not willing to follow the law. Now, people's grand jury is their indictment's supposed to carry the exact same weight as any other indictment. Supposed to. The problem is we live in a society now where the people's voice through a grand jury or something like that is not going to be recognized.
Well, I remember, you know, I mean, no disrespect to what's the guy, Gould? Is it Gould? James Russell J. Gould, the guy who said he claimed the Title IV flag and all that. They talked about how, you know, all that stuff sounds wonderful, but you know, what power do you have behind that that's going to enforce it?
If there's no application, what does it matter?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, so, and that's the tough part. I'm just telling you what the Constitution says.
100%.
And how we can get it applied, I don't know.
Yeah,
we haven't been down that road yet.
And that's my question. That's my sincere question. How does that work?
And I really don't know. The way it's supposed to work, but it's not going to.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
you
the
have to
people have
have,
their grand jury, they issue the indictment, then the sheriff or the marshal carries out that indictment. Then it goes
Mhm.
before court for conviction, and once convicted, they can never hold office again. In the
right.
simplest terms, that's what's supposed to happen. But you can't force a sheriff or a marshal to carry out the indictment. You can't force the courts to even recognize that the indictment is a legal indictment.
Well, the sheriff and the marshal, what they're going to do is they're going to enforce the orders by the people that are paying them.
That's a good point.
So they're going to enforce the orders by people that are paying them. And if the orders that the government of the United States is giving to the marshals or whatever, and the government no longer is paying them, or the government doesn't have any money to pay the army, I mean, the army isn't going to do it for free. The marshals aren't going to do it for free. So you have to, their orders are only enforced by those who have the wherewithal to provide something to them in exchange for them following the orders.
He who has the gold has the power.
Golden rule. He who has gold makes the rules.
Yeah, so
Just saying.
I'm with you on that. I'm just telling you the way it's supposed to, but yeah, I guarantee you, supposed to don't matter in many
100%.
cases. I mean, we are definitely far from Kansas. I mean, it's just like the courts are supposed to give judicial opinion on the cases they review or the laws that they review, not legislate from the bench and strike them down, but they do. And so, well, how do we get them to stop doing it? Well, I can quote them the Constitution until I'm blue in the face, but until something happens to force them, they're going to keep doing it. So I
Correct.
don't have the answer. I really don't. I'm just telling you the way it's supposed to be. And that's where the militias and the organizations and people and the grassroots and all that has to figure that out. How are we going to get them to do it? We know the way it's supposed to be, but we don't, but we know they're going to defy that. So yeah, it's a good question. And I'm not a prognosticator, so I can't say, oh yeah, well, on such and such day, there's going to be an armed insurrection, or I don't know.
Yeah, I see. I don't. But my personal belief is I don't believe there's enough people to do that. Even if they had the goal of having an armed insurrection, I don't believe there's enough people that would overcome.
And there's an awful lot of people who do believe that there's enough, and I tell people all the time. So you think we ought to have a civil war, huh?
I didn't.
I mean,
it's not even about. I don't even want that. That's not what I'm saying. If you really talk about, I think you and I have had this discussion about call it Team 17. My belief is the Team 17 was was designed specifically to prevent said insurrection, because that was we were being baited into that.
right.
And if we were being baited into that because that's what they wanted us to do, so that they would give them the justification to bring in forces from, call it UN or whatever, to come in and quell whatever they had. So anyway, whatever. I'm not trying to get off topic.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and once again, when we go through the Constitution, I'm telling you the way the founding fathers intended and the way it's supposed to happen. But I understand we're not in Kansas anymore. Speaking of that, I always say that not in Kansas anymore. Frank L. Baum had a lot more insight than people realize.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if people truly understood what the Wizard of Oz was
all about,
I mean, it was very, very political.
There's a video called The Secret of Oz. Matter of fact, if you look it up, it goes through quite a bit of it.
Yeah, the Wizard of Oz was an extremely political. It was a writing of the day, and I think it was Brian, the guy Brian Williams Jennings Bryan, I think was he was one of the guys. Anyway, whatever. But yeah, The Secrets of Oz. It's when if you understand it, it was actually an amazing piece of work.
Mm-hmm. The symbology in that book and ultimately the movie is absolutely incredible. All right, let's continue.
100%.
So now, someone asked me one time, I said, well, gosh, Congress can lift the this disability with 2/3 of vote. Why would they want to give someone who has sinned against the system and is an enemy to the system the opportunity with the 2/3 of the vote to come back? What's going on there? I don't know. I just know what it says. I haven't heard anything that says otherwise, but one wonders, was there some people said, hey, if we pay enough money, can I get my 2/3 vote to get back in? One wonders. One wonders. All right, let's continue. Section 4. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. In other words, any debt incurred by the Union over this war or whatever, it is public debt. It's not be questioned. It's going to be paid back. It's on the books. Now, it's funny because I remember years ago, and I think this is when Obama was still president, and Pelosi decided to use that clause as an excuse as to why they had to raise the debt ceiling. She says it's constitutional. We have to raise the debt ceiling because it says the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned.
Mhm.
So by not raising the debt limit, you're questioning the debt that we owe. That's not what it meant. There's so much more to it. It has to do with the debt that was incurred during the war between the states. That is not to be questioned. That debt exists. Now, that said, that's the Union debt. Well, what about the Confederacy's debt? You're going to get a kick out of this.
Lay it on me, brother.
But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave. But all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. In other words, that debt's your problem. You pay it. Federal government's not even going to touch it. We're not going to incur it. We're not going to include it. We're not bailing you out. The cost that you incurred, the debt that you have because of rebellion, because of insurrection, because of secession, and because of losing your workforce, because slavery is no longer legal, that's your problem. The US government is not going to be involved. The only debt that's recognized that will be paid by public dollars is the debt incurred by the Union in that war. All other debt, your problem. It's illegal in the first place, so you figure out how to pay it. That's what it's saying.
Which basically made it says it essentially rendered the South incapable of coming back.
Well, they were
Without-
devastated as it was. Have you seen?
Correct.
Have you seen that? There, photography was a new thing,
I know.
and there's a handful of images about what the South looked like after being devastated. Now, have you seen images of what Germany looked like after World War II?
Yes.
It looked good compared to the South.
Yeah.
The South was completely leveled. It was decimated from this war. The South didn't just win. As they went through, they destroyed everything.
Mm-hmm.
Decimated.
Well, it's certainly in Georgia and South Carolina.
Especially
From,
General Sherman, yeah.
Yeah, with Sherman. Mm-hmm.
And now on top of that, public dollars not going to help you with your debt. It's your problem.
Right.
And you got to rebuild somehow. And you get all this
Right.
debt. No one's going to loan you money. Yeah, it's a reconstruction period. Took a long time to reconstruct the South, and the South never really totally came back from it until about the 1990s. Did you hear what I just said, folks? It took 130 years before the South really started coming back. And then it was at that point that the South finally began manufacturing. And it wasn't just because of the money and all that, it was because of attitudes. The South never had manufacturing. The South was all about raw material, and farming and agriculture and all that. In fact, prior to the war between the states, the South wasn't even allowed to have manufacturing. All the manufacturing was done in the North. If the South began to manufacture, what would the North be good for? So the North was doing all the manufacturing, and then they were the ones that were collecting the import-export fees and the taxes and everything. And they were making a bundle on the raw materials that are coming out of the South, and the South couldn't do anything about it because they were unable to manufacture. And the South didn't begin manufacturing until the 1990s. Now, when the South began manufacturing in the 1990s, what happened to the South politically? It swung way to the right.
Mhm.
Began voting conservative, Republican. And now we've got people saying, well, that was because of the Dixiecrats in the 60s. If it was because of the Dixiecrats in the 60s, why did it take 30 years before they started voting Republican?
Exactly.
So the Dixiecrat argument is a false one.
Just like the what do they call it? What is it, the party switch or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at the number of, that's what I'm talking about, Dixiecrats and all. If you look at the number of Democrats that switched to the Republican Party, I think there was 3 or 2. It was a small number. It happened in the 60s.
Well, no, it wasn't. I don't think they were talking about party. I think it was talking about ideology. It's like the Democrats became the Democrats.
Oh, no. Well, that's what started it, because see, what happened was,
right.
Because what the argument is the Democrats stopped being the racist party and the Republicans became the racist party. So the racists from the Democratic Party all jumped over to the Republican Party. Those are the Dixiecrats. And then because all the racists were now in the Republican Party, that's why the South began voting Republican. That's the argument. So now, getting back to what I said now, 2 or 3 of them made jump. So it wasn't this mass migration, number one. Number 2, it wasn't because of racism. The Democrat Party remained racist, trust me. It wasn't the Republicans. Number 3, if that jump in the 60s is what caused the South to start voting Republican, what is it they didn't start voting Republican till the 90s, 30 years later?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm saying, is their argument doesn't add up. Like most of
At
their
all.
arguments, almost all of their arguments. All right, so that is the 14th Amendment. Well, we got one small part left. We got a little bit left. Let's see. Or any claim, or let's see. But all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held legal and void. Okay, we read that. Section 5, the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. I cannot stand where it says that in the Constitution and some of these amendments where Congress has the power to enforce with legislation. Legislation is not enforced through legislation. Legislation is enforced by the executive branch. Congress doesn't have the authority to enforce anything. They make law. If it's going to be enforced, it's through the executive branch. I hate the fact that Congress shall be able to enforce this. No, that's not proper language. I have a real problem with that. That's just me. Okay. 15th Amendment. Let's talk about the 15th Amendment for a second. And I want to get more back into the war between the states because I want to talk about a few things. Now we're getting into a little history after I'm done reading this. The right of citizens of the United States to vote. First of all, I think voting is a privilege of citizenship. I don't believe it's a right, but that's just me. Shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. In other words, just because you used to be a slave doesn't mean we can't keep you from voting. And now I'm the one ringing, and I am going to not answer that. People should know if they get my emails that I'm on with you right now. So that tells me if someone doesn't read the emails. All right. So right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. In other words, your ability to vote, there may be reasons that you're not allowed to vote, such as maybe not being a citizen, but race, color, or previous condition of servitude cannot be one of those reasons. In other words, this was to make sure that these now emancipated slaves were able to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they did is, okay, if we got to let them vote, then we'll just make it real hard for them. That's where poll taxes and games like, well, if you can recite the Constitution and tell me how many marbles in that jar, boy, is, then we'll let you vote. That kind of stuff was going on. So it was being defied by some peoples. Anyway, so that's the Reconstruction Amendments. Now, here's why this is all important. And let's talk about this for a second. So here we have a country that has slavery. Slavery is one of the most debated political issues of the time. And you have two parties on opposite ends of the issue. You have the Democrats who believe that that slavery is a good thing, that it's necessary. Our economy cannot function without it. We have a Republican Party saying we need to get rid of slavery and allow the free market to do what it does. Employees will appear. Innovation will happen. We will be able to do these things without slaves. We believe in America. Enslaving anybody is bad. Who were the first slaves in the United States?
They were white.
They were white. So you don't believe the 1491 deal or the what's that other one called?
I think it's the 16. What is it? The 1612.
Something like that.
1612 or whatever.
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah. Well,
that movement. Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely inaccurate. First of all, the first slaves were white. Now, granted, the time allotted for the slavery was limited to 7 years. So they were enslaved for 7 years. Then after the 7 years were up, they basically
I mean, and it wasn't pure slavery from the standpoint. I mean, they were indentured servants. They wanted to come to America.
Indentured servitude, right?
They wanted to come to America. They wanted to get away from Europe. So they basically gave up 7 years of their life to come, and they served 7 years to pay off the debt that it took for whoever it was to bring them over here.
So now the guy who you were giving your servitude to has lost a farmhand. And now there's a competitor who needs a farmhand. Now 2 farmhands are needed. And as this kept happening, the indentured servants weren't coming in fast enough. So they needed another way to put hands on the plows and feet in the field. And so slavery, as we see it today, or as we saw happen, and as today in history we look back upon, happened. Now, back then, the slaves weren't always black. In fact, the first slave owner on record, and the reason why I say on record, in other words, the paperwork shows he was a slave owner, it was because of a court case. What happened is this particular slave owner, Antonio Johnson, had promised that after a certain amount of time, the indentured servants would get their freedom. Then when the time came, he says, hey man, I still need you in the field. I'm not letting you go. I own you. You're my slaves. They sued. And Antonio Johnson won. And those people became permanent slaves. Oh, by the way, one of them was white. And Antonio Johnson was black. So the first slave owner on record in the United States is actually a black man. And of the 3 slaves that sued him, one of them was white. Just saying. Now, that all said, so slavery is this condition that exists in the United States. And Thomas Jefferson warned that if we were to emancipate the slaves quickly, there would be animosity that would rise between the races. They believed in gradual emancipation and gradually getting rid of slavery. And they believed that it needed to be each state doing it on their own. And they believed that slavery would be gone within their lifetime because it had already begun. The abolition of slavery had already begun in the North, and they believe it would be like a virus that would infect the nation and would eventually work its way all the way down to the southern states. But that didn't happen that way. And when it came to slavery, it was upheld constitutionally by Article 4. So Article 4 says that if a slave is to escape, it has to be returned to its owner. Then the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 reiterated that and doubled down on that. So from the South's point of view, there was constitutional authorities regarding slavery that were not being followed by the North. Now, does that make the Constitution a pro-slave document? No, it's not a pro-slavery document. In fact, Frederick Douglass, who was an escaped slave and quite the orator in later years, argued that first of all, and he taught himself how to read, by the way. He read the Constitution, and one of his first quotes, I love it, says, "I hated the Constitution until I read it." Has an effect on people, I think. The other thing is this, he says, "I have studied the Constitution. I do not find it to be a pro-slavery document." In fact, most of the founding fathers were abolitionists. They wanted to get rid of slavery. Well, Doug, many of them owned slaves. I know that. Jefferson owned slaves, but he was an abolitionist. He wanted to get rid of slavery. He hated it. He inherited pretty much almost all of his slaves. And he wanted to do what he could to get rid of it. Slavery was a blight. It was a great sin, and they wanted to get rid of it. But it remained, and it hung in there. And finally, a war between the states emerged. So, well, Doug, in the beginning, though, those white people in America, the vast majority of them, they thought that, black people were lesser than human. And so, that's why that was happening. Really? You sure about that? You sure that a vast majority of white people in America during the time of the Declaration and Constitution were racist? A vast majority of them? Well, let's examine that for a moment. For some of you, you get a kick out of this if you've not heard this. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He had assistance from other people that were in the room every once in a while. He did his best work between 6 and 10 at night. And in the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, which was changed on July 1st, 1776, 3 days before it was officially signed, Jefferson had included in the original draft 138 words of anti-slavery language. He blamed the crown, the king, for slavery in America. And he accused the king, says, hey, and the parliament says, hey, now you try to use the people who you've wronged. You have been wronging through slavery. You have been the problem in their lives. And now you're trying to get them to turn against us. You're trying to use them as a tool against us. What's wrong with you? And then, and he goes on about how, it's slavery is wrong, and the British Empire is at fault for it, and evidence shows, it is shown through Virginia as a commonwealth prior to the war of the Revolutionary War, asking to abolish slavery and it being denied by the crown. And in these 138 words of anti-slavery language, Jefferson does something very fascinating when he refers to the slaves. He calls them men. And he doesn't just call them men. He puts the word men in all caps, capital M, capital E, capital N, men. That these men are human. These men are equal to us. Interesting, because in the earlier part of the Declaration of Independence, he puts all men are created equal. Well, yeah, but he didn't mean all men. He didn't. He used all caps men for people enslaved. So as far as Jefferson was concerned, they were created equal on equal footing as everybody else. Well, yeah, but they were in slavery. How's that equal? I said they were born equal. Their condition was unequal. And if you're born equal in the eyes of God, what that means is that you are entitled to the same laws and privileges and immunities that the citizens are, because you're equal under the law. You're equal in the eyes of God. And this language, this 138 words of anti-slavery language, did not remain in the Declaration because they were seeking a unanimous declaration. They wanted all 13 states to be a part of this, and 2 of the states had a problem with it. 2.
Which ones?
South Carolina and Georgia. Now, here's my question. If the vast majority of white people at the time believed that blacks were less human, were racist, how is it that 11 of the 13 states were fine with the anti-slavery language of the Declaration, and it was 2 that removed it? And then on top of that, the 2 that were against it were the least populated states when it came to the point of view of white free population. How is that possible? It's not. So I'm here to tell you that the founders were not racist, and the vast majority of white people did not see blacks as lesser. And in fact, most of them realized slavery was a great sin and it needed to be done away with.
Mhm.
Now, that said, we're told, yeah, but President Lincoln, well, at least he was there because he freed the slaves.
Mhm.
Did Lincoln free the slaves?
The emancipation. Have you heard Brady's thought about the Emancipation Proclamation and it being a war tactic?
Yeah, he learned that from me.
Oh, he learned that from you.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have heard it.
Yeah, Brady's a cracker because he's telling me this the other day. He said at the Saturday Constitution Association dinner a couple weeks ago, one of his war hamster online buddies shows up to the event. Never met him in person.
He told me all about that. He told me that's right. That's hilarious.
Yeah, so they get talking, and he says, as I'm standing there, he says, everything I tell you, all that wisdom, it came from this guy. He's pointing at me. He says, he tells me, and an hour later, I'm online telling you what he told me.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, why does it take an hour? Sometimes I got to make sure he knows what he's talking about. And guess what? It always checks out. But anyway.
I thought it was fascinating to know that. Well, I mean, if you go back and you look at, I don't remember who he was responding to. I want to say it was like, it was who was the big George Templeton Strong or somebody like that. He was a very powerful man of the day. That Lincoln penned a letter that was put into the New York Times, and he basically said, he says, look, if I could free this, if I could save the Union and without freeing the slaves, I would do that. If I could save the Union with freeing all the slaves, I would do that. If I could save the Union by freeing some of the slaves and keeping some of the slaves in bondage, I would do that also.
Was holding together the Union.
My primary goal is to preserve the Union.
Right.
That was Lincoln didn't care about the slaves, and when they
in fact, he was actually a racist.
He was a hardcore one. I actually encourage you guys, if this sort of thing interests you, to seek out, go look up Donald Livingston. He has some really, really good stuff. I think it's on the Abbeville Institute a YouTube channel, and he's got some really interesting stuff about some would say revisionist history of the United States in regards to the South. Him and was it Thomas De Lorenzo? Those guys are fantastic.
Thomas J. De Lorenzo.
Thomas J. Excuse me.
Yeah, matter of fact, he's got a book out called The Real Lincoln, and if you read that, it will change your mind quite a bit about him. Lincoln is on my list of the 5 worst presidents in the history of this country, and people are shocked when they hear that. But let me get back to now what I was going to say earlier. So, here's the question for the audience: did Abraham Lincoln free the slaves? No. The 13th Amendment did. But what about the Emancipation Proclamation? Emancipation Proclamation, first of all, proclamation is not a law. It's a proclamation. It's like the National Day of Prayer was a proclamation. It's not law. You're not required to pray. It's a suggestion, right? A proclamation holds no power of law. So if the Emancipation Proclamation is a proclamation, holds no power of law, how could it free the slaves? First of all. Second of all, the way it's worded, what it did is it said that the persons who were in the occupied lands by the North that were south of that Dixie line, though they were freed. Didn't free any slaves that might still be in the North, which there were 3 slave states in the North actually that still had slaves at that point: Delaware, Maryland, and West Virginia. Which is more evidence that the war really wasn't about slavery as much as it was holding together the Union, because West Virginia had seceded from the state of Virginia. After Virginia seceded, 13 counties got together and said, hey, we want to reapply to the Union because we're against secession.
Mhm.
and they were accepted back into the Union as a slave state. If the
Correct.
war was about slavery, they would not have accepted West Virginia back in as a slave state. They would have said,
Absolutely.
hey, all right, you can rejoin the Union, but you gotta get rid of slavery first. The war wasn't about slavery as much as it was about holding together the Union at that time in the beginning. So what was happening is the war wasn't going as well as the North had expected. The Southerners were quite a pain in the butt. They were handling themselves. It was a tough war, and it didn't look good for the Union. Part of the reason for that is because the South was getting help. Because, see, the problem is there were tariffs going on that the North, remember, North had the manufacturing, and they're the ones that was doing trade with Europe. South didn't get to trade with Europe. It was all going through the North. And the tariffs were so high, the European countries like, hey, man, if you guys win the war, Confederate States, can we deal directly with you, not have to worry about the North? We'll do the manufacturing. We'll teach you guys how to manufacture, and keep the tariffs low. And man, we're with you because we want your goods. We want your cotton. We want your tobacco. And we hate dealing with the North and their high tariffs and all that jazz. South's like, yeah, no problem, man. We'll work with you. So the European governments like, all right, we'll help you guys out, man, because we want the Confederacy, because we want to split America. We want to deal with the South individually without the North in the way. And so the Southern ports were being protected, blockaded by European navies. The Northern Navy could not get into the Southern ports because of the blockades. And I don't care who you're talking about, what war you're talking about. He who controls the seas controls the world. The seas are very important, not just because of the ocean part, but because of things like rivers too, especially back then, because that was the trade routes. So Abraham Lincoln's thinking about this, and he realizes, slavery is, for the most part, has been outlawed in Europe at this point. And the people, the citizens in Europe, are anti-slavery big time. So Lincoln gets the idea, if I make this war out all about slavery, and the people in the streets in Europe start complaining to their government, hey, you're in a war and you're supporting the pro-slavery because this war now is all about slavery. If he could do that, he could get Europe out of the war, and that would open up a oceanic, a maritime front that the North really needs. So the Emancipation Proclamation is written, and it makes the war all about slavery. It makes it less about secession and more about slavery. It is now a war about slavery. And exactly what Lincoln thought would happen, happened. It was a brilliant political move. Now the people in those countries in Europe are going, whoa, wait a second. You guys are supporting the pro-slavery side in a war over slavery?
Right.
We're not supporting this crap. You want to be reelected? You better get our Navy out of there. And that's what happened. Europe pulled all of their ships out. First they hit Charleston, then they hit New Orleans. And why is New Orleans so important? Number one, you split the Confederacy in half. Number two, now you got that trade route from the Gulf all the way up to the northern states, the Mississippi River.
Mississippi River. Hey, I'm in Mississippi.
So now suddenly the war turns. Because if you know anything about war, the moment someone has to start fighting multiple fronts, they're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to Germany. That's what happened to Japan. That's what happened to Germany before, and Austria-Hungary.
And, that, and I don't know if we've talked about this. I don't know if you and Scott talked about this, but the Navy is the only branch of the military that does not need to be constantly reaffirmed.
Yeah, Article 1, Section 8. We talked about that when we went through it.
Right.
Yeah. Army and the other services, not counting the Marine Corps, because Marine Corps is part of the Navy, but the other services, the Army, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard, their
not the Coast
funding
Guard.
has to be reapproved.
The Coast Guard too?
Coast Guard, but it's different. Theirs is not every 2 years. Theirs is a whole different thing. See, the problem with the Coast Guard, you got to understand, originally they were not a military service. They were five or six, I can't remember, different federal services that were separate from each other.
Mhm.
One of them was lighthouse services. One of them was the port service. And they did these different things. And so it was just a thing that the federal government did to protect our coast and the maritime and all that jazz. And then what got realized was we've got all these different entities. They really need to be under one leadership. So they pulled them all together and they created the Coast Guard. But the Coast Guard, even then at that time, wasn't really considered a military service. And each of these parts of the Coast Guard, they received their funding. I think I want to say it was annually. I'm not 100% sure. But and so the Coast Guard has kind of been kind of like
Well,
the ugly kid's sister. That's
right,
kind of
but
a little different from everything else.
that's kind of getting into the weeds of my point. The point you were making is that he who controls the seas is
Right,
king.
and that's not the
And-
Coast Guard. Coast Guard
and
are
the
the puddle
Navy,
jumpers.
the reason that the Navy never needed to be refunded, if you will,
Right.
is because the Navy was put into place to protect commerce of the United States.
Right.
So
And- Yeah, what it says in Article 1, Section 8 is exactly this. Congress shall have the power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Then it says Congress shall have the power to provide and maintain a navy, period.
right.
And my army friends, I like to say that the Constitution is proof that the Navy is more important than the army.
Well, I will I will echo that sentiment because I'm Navy. As were you. I've got a friend of mine who went to West Point, and we only talk once a year, Army Navy game. But anyway, getting back to the point here. So we've got now this war that has changed direction because of the Emancipation Proclamation that did not free the slaves. It was a political move to get Europe out of the war. That's the point. So now we've got this war by this president who had campaigned not on getting rid of slavery, but on containing it. And he even believed that another country should be formed in Africa, and that once they're freed, they should be sent away to that country, not left in America, because they could be a problem. And that country, what, by the way, was created, and some of the slaves did go there. It's called Liberia. Yeah. It's interesting. Let's wrap it up on this point because it's almost time.
Mhm.
I want to make a comment about a Civil War movie that I'm very fond of, even though I don't think any Civil War movie ever shows the way it really was. I think it's all.
I agree with you.
It all makes it look like it's romantic. But there was in the movie Gettysburg, Tom Berenger was playing General. I'm fucking brain farting. He was a General Longstreet, and Longstreet was talking to that Colonel Fremantle who'd come over. He was like one of the British Guards, and he says, "I earnestly hope that your country and mine will be allies." And Tom Berenger looked at him and said, "Your government never ally itself with an institution that has with a government that has the institution of slavery." And he said, you know that, and I know that. And he said, we said we should have freed the slaves, then fired on Fort Sumter. I mean, that was the one thing that I've learned about the movie Gettysburg is even though the movie didn't portray the war the way it really was, there were a lot of historical accuracies in that movie because it was based off of the book Killer Angels by what was it, Shirah, whatever. But the point being is that I don't know if that quote is accurate, but I imagine that there was truth to what he was saying.
Mm-hmm. I think so too.
So
and that is one of the better movies on the war between the states.
I agree. So
and notice that I say war between the states, everybody. I don't say Civil War.
Yeah.
A civil war is when two entities inside a whole is fighting for control of the whole.
Right.
The southern states, the Confederate states, had seceded. They were no longer part of the whole. Therefore, it wasn't a civil war. It was a war between the states, the Union states and the Confederate states.
Right.
Two different countries, in fact.
They were not fighting the South was fighting to govern themselves, and the North was fighting to keep them under their thumb.
Right. And the Republican Party, shortly after that, did become a very big government party because they wanted to do everything they could with federal supremacy to punish them for misbehaving as states.
Mm-hmm.
And now the left has taken on that attitude of, well, no state should be ever be allowed to misbehave again. So they believe that secession is now illegal because some judge said
Right.
so.
Correct.
Constitutionally, every single state has the authority to secede. Any state right now, if they want to secede, they could. This is a voluntary union. It's not a firm union. It
Right.
shouldn't be the United States is, which is a nationalistic system. It's the United States are a pluralistic
Because
federation of states.
we are a collection of states
Correct.
that allow the federal government to basically arbiter problems and stuff that we have between the states. So
There you go.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
See, so
anyway,
even you can be taught.
I can be taught. I can learn a few things in my life. I can, even in my old age.
Yeah.
Even in my medically collapsing body. So
Yeah. And you know what? I want to say this before we go. I have to give you kudos, man, because I know you're not feeling good, but yet somehow you're managing a lot of smiles.
well, I'm trying. I'm medicated, but as I said, the war rages on, and it's not going to stop because I need medical attention. So,
Well,
and
you're
I'm
medicated,
well enough.
but you don't sound like you're as medicated as Biden yet.
I'm well enough to do these, and I want to make sure that you guys get. I know there's a lot of people who really like this, so
Yeah.
I promise you guys. And the class that we did last week when I was in the hospital, we're going to. I'm going to get that uploaded to.
Oh, so it's not on the air. It's not on.
It's not
Yeah.
on the YouTube channel. It's on Rumble, but I need to download it and upload it to YouTube. And I really haven't had the opportunity, frankly. I had one day I was in the hospital until Saturday, and I had one day to get ready to come to Mississippi.
Yeah, and that's
that
the one we
was
did the
Sunday.
citizenship clause on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it needs
Right.
to be up. Okay.
So it does need to be up there 100%. So,
Yeah.
but if I don't get to it this week, I promise I'll get to it on the weekend to get it uploaded to the channel.
All right,
So-
now I'm going to give you guys the teaser for next week. Bankers. That's all I'm going to say. Bankers.
Bankers. Well, let the mind could go in a million different directions on that one.
We're talking about bankers, taxes, income tax, Federal Reserve, the budget, all of that stuff comes in play next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
All
we're
right,
getting into
guys,
what's called the progressive era, the 16th and 17th Amendments.
Yeah, let's not. And so let's like, can we just carve those out?
Yeah,
But anyway.
I've got two grenades. One says 16th, one says 17th. I mean,
Nice.
it's just, I'd love to blow them up, but yeah,
That's
we'll talk
17th.
about that. We'll talk about the beginning of that, the 16th Amendment next week, and then we'll
Right.
go to the 17th Amendment after that, because we'll probably spend the whole hour on the 16th. If we don't, then we'll get to the 17th. But I have a feeling
Yeah.
the 16th will be a big enough topic for this group,
And
and
if you
and you and I, that'll.
I would encourage you guys to look up before we even talk about it. I would encourage you guys to look up look up ratification of the 16th Amendment and see what you find. There's some interesting information out there about that. The many believe that both the 16th and the 17th Amendment were never really fully ratified. There was a lot of things that went awry there.
I'd
But,
also encourage you to look up an article by Cleon Skousen
Oh yeah.
titled "The Amendment That Shouldn't Be."
Excellent. Yes. Cleon Skousen was fantastic. He was the guy who wrote The Naked Communist.
Right, the Naked Communist and the 5,000-Year Leap.
Yes.
And he's also the guy behind the company that prints these pocket constitutions I use.
Is he really? I didn't
Uh-huh.
know that.
Yep, National
know
Center
that.
of Constitutional Studies. That's Cleon Skousen's baby.
Wow, I did not know that. That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, you know how he
All
got
right, guys.
started?
What's that?
Teaching Constitution classes.
Really?
Yeah, in his garage though.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
All
All
right.
right, guys, we're gonna leave. We're gonna halt it at that point. So hope you guys all got something beneficial from this, and we'll see you guys next week on the right time. And I'll
On
be
the
back
right
in
time. And
California.
also, are you supposed to be a little better off by then?
Oh, I should be. Yeah, my procedure's tomorrow.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and
So you can have a
my
whole week to
procedure's
heal.
tomorrow, and I come home on Monday, and by Tuesday I should be close to 100%.
I mean, you're not going
So.
to be doing somersaults and hand sprints, but you'll be ready to
No,
roll.
but no, Wednesday or Thursday I'll be able to get back in the gym. So I'm excited about that.
Very good.
So
All right. So
Excellent,
everybody,
guys.
we'll see you next week.
see you next week. Bye-bye.